Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on where you are in the world, and welcome to today's TechStrong Learning Experience, brought to you by ActiveState. My name is Cody, and I'm the host of TechStrong Learning, and we have an exciting presentation ahead. First, I do need to cover just a couple of housekeeping notes. Today's session is being recorded. If you miss any of our discussion, perhaps you'd like to rewatch or maybe share with a friend, the on-demand recording will be made available shortly after we conclude our live session today. If you look to the right side of your screen, you'll see there are a couple options to engage with us. The first of which is the chat tab. So I want you to go ahead and start warming that up for me now by letting us know from where you are joining. Hello to Idaho, Ontario, Dallas, and Boca Raton. If you have any questions for us, you're going to use that next tab that says Q&A. So feel free to send in any questions you have for us there. If you click the handouts section, you will see that there are a couple of resources that are available there for you. Feel free to click those, and I'll remind you of these at the end when we get to our call to action slide. But before we close out today, we will also be giving away 4 $25 Amazon gift cards, so be sure to stick around. The topic of our discussion today is 3 steps to software supply chain security success in 2023. And I'm joined by Loreli Kadopin, Vice President of Product at ActiveState, and our very own Mitch Ashley, CTO at TechStrong Group and Principal at TechStrong Research. So Mitch and Loreli, thank you both so much for joining me. Mitch, do you want to get us kicked off?
Absolutely. Loreli, thank you, Cody. Loreli, great to be doing this with you.
And, it's a pleasure, Mitch.
We've had some great discussions leading up to this event. Software supply chain security is a rich topic. And there's a lot of things going on in it, and happy to have ActiveState sponsoring our webinar today. Folks know who I am if they've been on a TechStrong Learning event, because I'm part of TechStrong Group and the CTO, and also with the research division. Tell us about yourself and give us just an overview of ActiveState.
Absolutely, Mitch. So, my name is Loreli, and I've been in enterprise software for, over 20 years, both in the corporate enterprise as well as startups, and have held different roles from coding, development, to architecture, and now into product management. I currently lead the product team at ActiveState. And just a little bit about ActiveState. Really, the purpose of ActiveState is to just create technology that works. This is made by developers for developers in mind. And in terms of what we deliver a secure open source supply chain for the enterprise developers, focused on enterprise developers, and we make it easy and safe for developers to consume their open source dependencies. And we'll show you a demo at the very end of this presentation as well. We're really empowering enterprises to use open source and trust the components that they are putting into their software, and us providing our customers with trusted open source binaries, artifacts from source to the components that they are putting into their software.
Fantastic. I loved you come by this honestly too, as someone who's created software, been part of creating software with teams and organizations, and now product managing for ActiveState. So it's great. You know the area very well. So we're going to.
I've been there.
Yes, and lived a few of these problems, I'm sure, along the way. So that's great. And I want to mention too to folks that we have slides. We're using some slides today. Loreli and I are not slide readers, so we're not going to be reading all the bullets to you. There's kind of just a visual and something kind of follow along. We do have handouts that have a little bit more detail of some of the things that we will be talking about, and kind of supplemental content. So you're welcome to download those. They'll be provided to everyone who subscribed or registered for the webinar today, as well as attended, and we'll have that as available as handouts. So software supply chain security. By the way, that's a mouthful, Cody. I stumble over that myself every once in a while. So no problem, dude. on that. It's really easy to pick out a few sort of signposts along the way of we all know about solar winds, right? Maybe we all know a little bit as much about LastPass as some of them, but there's a lot of pieces or elements to software supply chain, pun intended, I guess. Which is that there's so many components of what we build our software from today. A lot of it is open source. I mean, very rarely do we ship a piece of code that's just our code, because even if it's Python, it's full of libraries that are packages that someone else wrote, right? I mean, I don't know when I shipped a piece of code that only had my stuff written into it. And what those signposts, Loreli, along the way of these, whether it's like PI for indexing, or it is, injecting malicious code into the SolarWinds software development process, and Microsoft tools. And a lot of people don't know the true details about how that all happened, but it is injecting or bad software, malicious software, getting into the system, into the chain of software, whether yours or open source or wherever. And it then playing some malicious role, whether it's performing functions that shouldn't be, accessing data it shouldn't, transferring that, communicating with places unknown that we don't want it communicating. But it's hard to know, right? We all trust the stuff we download. Unfortunately, we shouldn't, really.
Yeah. And, there's been some research around this. Your typical enterprise software consists of 80% open source, right? And only 20% of proprietary code. So you can imagine how it can really balloon if even just one infected component, how it can really, manifest into a lot of impact around various customers, including government, and even the smaller customers out there.
Well, and you might hear the number like that and say 80%, there's no way. My code, my applications, my system, I know there's a lot more of my stuff in it than there is open source. But when you think about, I might use a commercial product that has open source in it as part of my stack, part of what I'm delivering. I might use a third-party service that I'm talking to through APIs or incorporating data from that service that also is built on open source. So it's kind of a build upon open source stack. And that's part of where this complexity is for managing software supply chain integrity. But also it's a moving target, right? I love the little bomb icon on this chart. But and it isn't just a big one dropping down. It's like this continually moving target that we're always having to chase and make sure we've got secure software, not malicious software code in our pipeline.
Yeah, exactly. And as you mentioned, in the last couple of years, it's really there's been bad actors, if you will, who have discovered economies of scale. And what that really means is that in the past, these bad actors would need to target hundreds of corporations individually, but now they've realized that they can just target a single software vendor, similar to SolarWinds, that have thousands and thousands of customers that are consuming their software. And so with that, you now have this trickle effect or domino effect across the board, across all the consumers of your software.
Yep. Any software you consume is an attack vector for software.
Exactly.
Whether it's from GitHub tokens to, some accounting package that you might be accessing to do calculations for you that's coming from a library, or even, we're worried about virtual image security, container security, libraries, all kinds of forms that software come into, as well as us accessing it through APIs. So hopefully it's not a new topic on most people's radar for software supply chain security. But as a matter of fact, I think what we're going to probably talk about next is one of the reasons why it isn't is also because of the government order, right? The executive order on improving nation's cyber security. So say a little bit about this. I know this is a lot of what is driving your business, and we
Yeah,
can talk
absolutely.
about.
Yeah, because of the drastic rise in these attacks and cybersecurity attacks on, especially on your open source, governments are now starting to take notice. I think the SolarWinds definitely was one of the big contributors to that decision. So, for example, President Biden back in 2021, May of 2021, had issued an executive order, specifically 14028, to really improve the nation's cybersecurity and improve the security of your open source and your software. And then on top of that, back in last year of September 2022, they issued a memorandum specifically now focused on government agencies. And I'm sure, it's going to go, government agencies are consuming software from, third-party software vendors out there. So in that memorandum, they provided some key security guidelines and requirements that we're going to be talking about later. And they've also set some dates for the government agencies to now start working with their software suppliers to improve their software security. And it's not just the U.S. actually that's reacting to this, or even Northern America. Now you've got other countries and areas of the globe, including Europe and Asia, that are starting to jump on the wagon here. For example, you've got the UK, which issued the National Cybersecurity Strategy. They issued that last year. You've got Germany also, where they issued the Information Security Act. This is supposed to take into effect last year as well, January last year. And then recently, Japan's act on their economic security, that's supposed to go into effect this year. So there's been it's become front and center across the globe on ensuring your software supply chain is secure.
Well, and it is a bit of a moving target, so to speak, too, because there are multiple, they're all on their own timelines. Sometimes they're related, oftentimes not. But then they also change. They might delay this part of the order of, we'll give it another 6 months for people to catch up. And keeping track of all that it can be a little bit mind-numbing, because there are so many kind of variables to think of and know about and keep on top of. And when you plan for an event and you think you're ready, and then sort of where you're headed towards what you're supposed to do is shifting a little bit. So it's a lot of complexity. And I mean, regulatory environment globally is no small feat. I think one of the things that we've talked about before in our conversations about this area is while regulations can be and often are very complex, there is a way to kind of boil it down to a few essential things that if you do, you're going to get most of what you need to are required to do done. Sometimes with relative ease, sometimes with some work or with some help, it can be easier. And we're going to talk about those 3 steps to help people get affect this. But one thing I want to say about this too, Loreli, I love your reaction to this. It isn't people who are government contractors. It isn't, I don't have to be prime or subprime or one of the subs on a government contract supplier to be affected by this. Yes, those folks are directly, but I might write software that one of those suppliers or somewhere in a chain of suppliers, my code, my product, my software is used in that as well. So it's also subject to these requirements, even though I may not be getting notices from the federal government of, yes, you must comply. Talk a little bit about that, of sort of the reach of and impact of this.
Absolutely. I mean, you've got government agencies that are using software, again, from another private corporation, perhaps, that's building and producing the software for them. But guess what? Those ISVs or software vendors rely on other software vendors to build their software, right? So it's really this domino effect of not just, the government agencies may be the end consumers, but guess what? There are many various aspects of that in order to have made that software, right? And that includes not just the proprietary code. It goes back down to your open source, right? Open source makes it very easy for developers to develop new features and really accelerate that development cycle. But then open source also provides some challenges from a security angle, because now, bad actors are now starting to realize, oh, it's open source, so I can inject malicious code in there, be able to access secrets and information or data that's very sensitive. And so you've got this effect that all goes all the way down even to the open source community.
Mm-hmm.
And I think.
I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Sorry. And in terms of, and we'll go through these, there are three main aspects that, the memorandum and the executive order really boils down to. The first one is, your software bill of materials. And that's been pretty established in the last couple of years. Everyone knows about the importance of, software bill of materials. Then there's also, though, to your point, Mitch, of this standard emerging, there is also now the software attestations that need to be in place, right? Where government agencies need to get the software attestations letters from their software providers. So that's the second one. And then really the third one is ensuring that you practice a secure software development practice, right? Both on the government agency side as well as the software vendor side, the ones that are providing those software. So it really boils down into these three. And there are some key dates that came down from the memorandum. And so here it is. The first one is coming just in 4 months. By June of this year, government agencies now need to collect the attestation letters, including SBOMs for their critical software. And then a few months after that, now government agencies would now need to collect attestation letters from all kinds of software, not just the critical software that they're using. And when I say critical software, this could be, if you're in production, really having access to very sensitive information or, confidential information and so forth that the government needs to protect.
There's in the order, there are some, of course, definitions and orders are not always provide a lot of clarity. There is information in the orders, and we put the links. These links are available in the handouts in the slides that we'll provide everyone. If you can also Google those pretty easily. But it's happened very rapidly. It seems like it wasn't that long ago that the executive order came out. I mean, it was, I guess last year, if I remember right. But it's upon us, right? And we have to take some action. And even if we don't think we're impacted, this is almost kind of like one of those NIST standards. It's a good thing to do. You're probably going to have to do this at some point anyway. Why not do it? And as we all know, developers love to write documentation, so they'll be happy to fill out those attestations. I'm being extremely sarcastic as I can be. So obviously that's a big pain in the backside that we all want to find alternative ways, as well as how do we kind of automate as much of this as possible, of course, too. So as developers love to automate things and make our lives and other people's lives easier too. Well, let's jump to the first one and talking about software bill of materials. Not a new concept. I mean, it's talked about a lot now. As a matter of fact, it's the first thing that comes up when we talk about software. We talk about software supply chain integrity, and it's because it's kind of that security principle of you have to know what you have to be able to secure it, right? And how would you know if you have software that might have malicious code embedded in it, or how do you even know what you have to start with, to know where to look? And that's the whole principle behind software bill of materials. Just like you would have, this is Cody's car we took apart in his driveway over the weekend. I'm sorry, Cody. We'll send someone out to pick up the parts and deliver a new vehicle for you. Cody,
we're injecting some malicious code in one of those parts, Cody.
We are. We found some suspicious materials there. You'll be hearing from some authorities, by the way, but that's a whole other topic. But it's very much like a parts list of parts, right? Everything is made up of other parts, in essence, software components. And that bill of material is the first thing you need in order to then know, well, where's it sourced from? And what attestations do you have, or can you get, or how do you get to validate that those are what they are? Almost kind of like a chain of custody in a way of what this is.
Exactly. And the good thing about SBOMs is that it not only provides you the list of the parts or components that make up your software, but it also gives you more metadata information about those components, whether that's, the open source license. So especially on the enterprise side, where you're selling your software, you can't have GPL license or very unpermissive license or copyleft type license on the packages that you're consuming. So it really enables the development team, as well as the security team and the open source compliance team within your company, to have a better view and insight of what make up the software that you're about to put into production or about to provide to your consumers.
But if you're in the software world, you might think, well, this sounds kind of like software decomposition analysis, right? What's all my software made up of? And well, yeah, there's very much some similarities. Is then taking it really both to the backward step, or the reversing, moving left, of where's the source from? Where did I get this? How do I know? Can I validate that that's where it's from, and where they're sourcing their code from, as well as how do we then provide it in form that I can do reporting, attestations, and others down the line. So, well, software decomposition analysis has its role. This is looking at it for other purposes too, to kind of taking it to another level.
Right. And, oftentimes, sometimes the SBOMs, you get the SBOM from your software vendor provider, but what do you do with it, right? So there are definitely some ways that you can validate and look and, just do some checks and balance with your CI/CD. As you're building your software, you can look at your SBOM, whether that's an automated way or a manual way, and just make sure that what you think you're consuming is what you're consuming, and there are no other bits that are coming in as part of your dependencies that you're not well aware of. So it really gives that visibility and insight and observability of your software. And there's various, and there's, I think, 3 different, most popular standards out there. There is the SPDX, which stands for Software Package Data Exchange. This is founded by the Linux Foundation and been, constantly being developed and refined since even back in 2010. You've got Cyclone DX, which was originated by OWASP, and that was since 2017. Then it became its own dedicated open source project, and then probably less popular SWID. But still supported by NIST and as part of the broader ISO IT asset management. But there are many tools out there that you can use to produce the SBOM, right? There's, the Microsoft SPDX, there's GitLab, there's Anchor, there's also Linux Foundation. The only thing about these tools is that they provide you the SBOM mostly for your proprietary code, right? Oftentimes, though, you don't have visibility of your open source components and all the way down to their transitive dependencies, right? All the way down to even your native libraries or C libraries that be required to be able to run your software.
Mm-hmm. It's interesting too, and sometimes we end up in this sort of the tragedy of the plethora of too many tools, where you have to use multiple to get kind of all the piece parts that you need, all the elements you need to get to pull together a full SBOM, if one's more targeted toward a Microsoft environment or this kind of a DevOps environment, whatever it might be. Helpful tools, but we also can sort of make work for ourselves to pull that all back together. And you want to do this on an ongoing basis. This isn't once every 5 years produce this. This is as software changes. It's got to be kept up to date, and we don't have to hire tons of people just to do manual work or integrate this information. Well, let's and there's a great question that someone's asking about. So what is this attestation and what does it look like? And can you give some examples? And it actually kind of works really well with the second step towards the software supply chain security, and that's software attestation. So talk to us about what it is, the format of it, and we'll get into some ways of how you produce that.
Yeah. So software attestations, really in a nutshell, is officially defined as an authenticated statement about your software artifacts or collection of your software artifacts, right? So it really allows customers a way to be able to independently validate the security and integrity of their supply chain. And in return, software attestations allows vendors or software vendors and providers to establish trust for their software with their consumers, right? And oftentimes, software attestations can be fed into your automated security or license policy engines, such as in toto and binary authorization. And so here, what you see here is just an example of this attestation format using the in toto attestation format. So, at high level, you have an envelope. Within your envelope, you have your statement and the signature to ensure that you're getting it from the person or provider that you think you're getting it from. And then within the statement, you've got your subject, the predicate, and a link to that. So essentially, your artifact is a subject, and the predicate, how was it built? What were all the ingredients that were used to build your artifact? What was your build script? What image did you use? And so forth, right? So there's many different information that you can gather from the attestations to really build that trust with your consumers. And like the SBOMs, this is still evolving. So the standards are going to evolve. We might have another format or way to be able to have and show your attestations with your consumers. So some of the inputs, for example, that you'll get out of the attestations are, your source code, right? The provenance of your source code. Where did it come from? Did it come from GitHub, for example? What processes happened to build your component or your artifacts? And what how was it scanned from a security perspective? How was it tested from a functionality perspective, and so on. And then also the environments, right? The details of the environments or where the building happened or the process happened, including the Docker images that you may have used to build your components. And lastly, of course, the outputs. What are the outputs that came into place or manifested as part of your attestation? Was that in a tarball format, for example, or an executable, and so forth? And so, and we have, I can, in my demo, I'll be providing a way to be able to produce this software attestation along with the SBOM, as if you're using the ActiveState platform, and, the ability to be able to also view the attestation.
Good news is we should and will be producing this digitally. It's not a case of another case of I'm here from the government and I'd like some more paper. We need to do this digitally. So to that point, I mean, you mentioned there are tools for generating just from that environment that it works in, whether it be like a GitHub or a Google. There are different tools. But again, we often don't work in one environment. We've got to figure out a way to do this across, all of the software that we use and are generating.
Yeah. And especially for attestations, this is where it really becomes a challenge to produce the attestation for your open source dependencies, because oftentimes, right, developers will get their open source dependencies from a public repository like PyPI, NPM, and so forth. And you don't necessarily get the attestation as part of that component or that artifact that you've just pulled in from the internet. You probably could produce the attestation for your first party code, your proprietary code. And like to your point, Mitch, there's definitely tools out there like TestifySec. There's Google Cloud Build, GitHub, and so forth. They can provide you the attestation for those proprietary code. But now you're talking about open source dependencies that make up 80% of your software. Where are those attestations? And so we realize this is a big challenge, listening to our customers, listening to our security leads, where they know they have this deadline from the government memorandum. And so now they're having to figure out some solutions out there to really produce the holistic view of your attestation.
You mentioned PyPI. I think I did too, about the package index. This is real stuff and is happening now. Attackers realize the value of getting compromised software through phishing attacks and other directed at developers. With PyPI, if I recall right, package developers, providers were emailed or contacted and said, we need to validate the process that we're using for submitting these. Here's a link, follow this link. Well, that link was actually a malicious site, a phishing site, to get people submitting their packages. Now suddenly even PyPI isn't, it can be compromised itself. So it's at a small level, like the open source I'm using, it can be at a larger macro level. This entire package manager might get compromised. And so it's open source. And I'm not saying it's all compromised, but it's all attackable and potentially an attack vector that we have to worry about. Exactly. Let's move to our third step. So we're almost at our kind of completing our 3 steps, talking about secure software development. And there are definitely some frameworks. As developers, we love frameworks, right? Software frameworks, development frameworks, all kinds of good things. And of course, NIST is a great source with their software supply chain security guidance. Those tend to be well thought out, pretty hardened, and continually maintained. So I always kind of start there as one of the places. Of course, SSDF, the Secure Software Development Framework, being another great source. So we aren't starting from scratch. We've got some great resources to say, as we're creating software, how do we do it securely in terms of managing the software supply chain integrity and making sure that it's secure. I'm curious your perspective on the role these frameworks are playing. Are people starting to adopt it? Are these really becoming a kind of core component of how we're creating software, or we still have a ways to go yet?
I think it varies, right? We have customers that are still in the early stage of their secure software development process and securing that process and following the guidelines set forth by NIST. And then we have some customers that are really on top of it, right? And their journey in the DevOps, DevSecOps are much more mature. So I think across the board, there's a lot of different, you've got companies that are still in the early stage of their journey, and then others that are in the middle, and then towards the end. We've helped all across the board our customers to really get as far to the right, if you will, of your journey. as possible, right? Really securing your software development process. So, it's across the board, I would say, Mitch.
It is like anything. We're all on our own journey on the path, and we may be ahead in one area and kind of getting caught up in others. So
Right.
it is the conveyor belt of work we have to kind of keep up with.
It is. And it's a great framework too. It covers, ensuring that your organizations are performing the secure process. It's making sure that you protect your software from like tampering or unauthorized access. It's making sure that you produce, your well-secured software with no critical vulnerabilities, for example, or high vulnerabilities, and then ensuring that you have a timely manner of remediating those vulnerabilities that may be impacting your software. And then so here, where you have on this current slide is, I wanted to talk a little bit about the SALSA framework. It's also an emerging framework. And it was originally proposed by Google, but now is being driven by, the industry consortium under the OSSF umbrella. And what it really covers is, it covers some of the requirements of the SSDF, the Secure Software Development Framework, especially related to ensuring the integrity of the software artifacts, open source or proprietary code artifacts that you're consuming into your software. And so I would say that, it's very aligned with SSDF. So by following SALSA, you'll probably achieve many parts of the SSDF framework and guidance, right? Though SALSA isn't necessarily required to follow the SSDF guidelines, it does provide a good map to help you achieve a good portion of those requirements. So, and there's, you can see here, you've got SALSA requirements. It's got, basically has 4 different levels, from, again, early maturity to very mature. You may have an artifact that is SALSA level 1, where you've got only your documenting your build process, for example, right? Not necessarily audited or validated, but you've got it documented. And then you've got SALSA level 2, where you're really preventing tampering of your build service, right? So an example of that is that you're hosting the source code, you're hosting your build systems that's producing the artifacts from the source code, you're signing your provenance and so forth. And then a higher level of that, SALSA level 3, is more of an extra resistance to those specific threats, such as security controls. Maybe you have ensuring that you are controlling who has access to your build service or your servers, and any kind of cross build contamination, similar to some of the cybersecurity attacks that have happened in the last couple of years. And then now you've got the highest level, SALSA level 4. There might be SALSA level 5 and so on, because it's an emerging framework as well. But really, this is the point or takeaway of the highest level of SALSA is ensuring that you have the highest level of confidence and trust of the artifacts that you are putting into your software. An example of this is that you've got 2-person review of the changes that you're committing into your source code. You've got a hermetic build service that's reproducible, that cannot be tampered with, and so forth.
Wonderful. You have some great questions coming up, and I think they'll fit well into, you've answered part of them. I think they'll fit well. We'll kind of touch on them again in our Q&A section. I want to move towards the demo, right? The fun. This is fun.
Yes.
More fun part of the conversation, because it's, I'm from Missouri.
Absolutely.
I like to be at work, right?
Yeah.
Sure.
And so I'm very excited to be doing the demo. So just a little bit about, a little bit more about Active State. So as I mentioned before, developers love using open source, right? There's definitely a lot of benefits of using open source, and thanks to the open source community out there, right, that are trying to do the right thing. However, there are going to be some challenges. Managing open source components, it's sometimes very complex, especially if you've got a very big and complex software. Ensuring that you have compliance on even not just the security part, but the license part of it. You might have security and license policies in place within your organization. And then, of course, challenges coming from day zero vulnerabilities and so forth that you may not be aware of when you have imported your open source, but later down the line it's been found. So here at ActiveState, what we do is we make using open source easy and secure. We shift left with security, delivering a secure open source build so that developers don't have to worry about that drudgery and security of having to build open source from scratch, right? It's very complex, and these are the learnings that ActiveState has had for about 20 years now. So, and we believe that we can provide a lot of value, especially with the emerging security standards out there. So we provide an end-to-end open source build and package management. We provide a consistent enterprise-wide compliance and security policy. And of course, we provide provenance of all of your open source components that come from the ActiveState platform. And we've listened to a lot of our customers, including your developers, your DevOps, IT, your security. Developers, there's just saying, well, it works on my machine. How come it's not working on your machine, right? So we provide a reproducible runtime environment that includes all of your open source runtime dependencies, and you can switch between different environments. And this is very helpful also for new employees that come in or new developers that come in and onboard into your development team. Instead of having to set up your environment from day one, you can hit the ground running from day one, right? By using a secure runtime, reproducible environment. On the DevOps side, we've heard from the DevOps and IT admins that, they have a difficulty of, managing the tool set that they are providing service to for their developers. And so we're providing that, the ability to be able to use different and various language ecosystems, and on-demand language and operating experts. We provide ability to compile across multiple operating systems in case you do have requirements, not just, for example, on Linux, but you have it for Windows and Mac. So ensuring that all of your open source dependencies and your runtime work in each of these platforms. And then, of course, on the security side, and I don't need to go on that one because we've been talking about that. And so if you can go to the next one. Here you go. And so
make sure we have enough time for our demo. So because we have
exactly. And I'll quickly do that. So, I'll show you how the platform can produce an SBOM, how the platform can produce an attestation, and all of that. The platform does have, it's based on a tenet of having a reproducible, hermetic, secure build service for all of your open source components. And so with that, I'll go ahead and run through my demo.
Great, take it away.
And this is where I will go ahead and share my screen, entire screen. And I believe it's this one. Nope. Let's see. Let me switch
your
screen.
Python, Visual Studio Python code environment there.
Right, I know. So this is it.
Welcome to live demos. Let's see, which screen is it on my thousands?
I know.
There we go.
We got two screens. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and jump into the platform. So here's the platform. Really, you can be part of various organizations. You may be part of a different various development teams out there. So we have the concept of organizations. I'm going to go ahead with my organization called Loreli Demo, and the way you would start is that you would create your runtime via a new project, right? So you create a new project, and in here you can select a language. We support various other ecosystems, especially Perl, Ruby, and Tickle. I'm a super user of this platform, so you can see other languages out there that we are currently working on, looking to support officially. Then you can select the Python version that you require. So here you've got, we provide you not just the latest and greatest version of Python, but also maybe older versions. And this is where we're seeing more of our customers really requiring that and needing that as a solution from ActiveState. I'll go ahead and continue with the 3.10.8 that's recommended. And by the way, we do also support an extended end-of-life extended support for Python 2. We do have several customers, enterprise customers, that are requiring a managed support for Python 2 because it's now end of life. It's no longer being maintained by the community, but we are backporting security fixes on the Python 2 if you require. And then, so now here I can choose the various operating systems that I need to run my runtime on. You can choose the flavor of your Linux, including Windows and so forth. We are actually very close to going GA with Mac. We've done a bit of work in the last couple of months to be able to make our build service much more performant on Mac. And then you can also provide the visibility of your project, whether you want it to be a public, meaning that you want all of your consumers and the entire ecosystem to be able to see your project. But in terms of public project, only the members of your organization can modify it, but anyone else can view the packages that you are putting into your project and be able to also deploy that runtime. But for an enterprise customer, you definitely would want a private project. In this demo, I'm using a public. And then you can name your project. So I'm going to name it as Keep Devs Happy. And now you can go ahead and directly add your direct dependencies, whether that's via requirements.txt file or just individual packages at a time. For this one, I'm just going to go ahead and finish and allow the build service to go ahead and build my runtime. This is how I can deploy using our CLI. But before I go there, I'm just going to go ahead and show you a little bit of the UI. This might be a little bit too, okay. So now the configuration tab here gives you all of the dependencies just coming from Python 3.10.8, right? This is the core Python dependencies. But now I can add my additional dependencies from on top of this project. So you can add packages individually, or you can import your requirements.txt file. I'll go ahead and use what you saw earlier. I'll go ahead and include that into my project. So maybe I'm working on a SciPy based project. I'm going to include all of these dependencies in there. Import. So now what it's doing is there's a solver of the platform, and then there's the builder. So it solves all of your dependencies along with the transitive dependencies, right? And so what you'll see is the ones in green are those transitive dependencies that got pulled in because I added these direct dependencies in place. So now, but you've got, it's also showing you some of the native libraries, right? So you've got LZMA, which is a C library, FFI, and so forth. And all of these packages, by the way, and components are built from source. Everything here is built from source. Now I'm going to go ahead and save my changes and start the build process. And it's finished. So you'll see, I can deploy now on my Windows, on my Mac machine, on my Linux machine, and so forth. So because I have a Mac, I'll go ahead and deploy it right now. And so in this case, I'm going to show you how to deploy using our CLI, or what we call the state tool. So there's two options. You can install the state tool first and then install the runtime, or you can do it in one command onto your terminal. But before I go there, I'm going to show you right now what my Python version is, right? So currently my Python version is 3.9.13. So now what I'm going to do is copy this and deploy by pasting the command. I'm going to remove the default because I don't necessarily need this environment up and running all the time. So I've got it's now deploying all of the bits into my local environment and then creating that virtual environment for you. And while it's doing that, with the time remaining, I'm just going to show you some of the other aspects of the platform through the UI. So you've got a history tab, for example. We've married dependency management with Git. So you'll see that, I first added, the Python 3.10.8, created that project with choosing these operating systems. And then I've added these packages as well. So it's a nice audit trail as well to understand who's done what. And you can also revert to a specific commit if you wanted to. And in case you wanted to try to reproduce a bug or so forth before the latest commit, you can go ahead and do that. Okay, so now it's deployed into my local environment, and I'm going to show you what version I've got. And I've got now, as you can see, I'm on version 3.10.8, which is based on this particular project, right? Okay, so now that I've got that, I'll go ahead and show you also on the configuration. You may have seen that there are 3 CVEs encountered on the Python 3.10.8. You can also change the version of your Python without having to create a new project. And this is one of the great things of the platform, is allowing our customers and developers to be able to upgrade from one lower version to another. So I can change the version. Let's say I want 3.10.9 and go ahead and save these changes. And now I've got a 3.10.9 Python for that. So now I'm going to go ahead and state pull. And what it's doing is basically pulling the bits now based on the Python 3.10.9. 3.10, yeah. And so as you can see, it's pulling down the bits for this new runtime. And so I'm here now. And so if I do Python 3 again, you'll see that I am now on 3.10.9. Another great thing about the CLI is you don't necessarily need to add all of your packages and dependencies on the UI. You can also do it through the state tool. So if I were to, let's say, if I wanted to state import, maybe I want requests, right? I can do that. So it's going to import state install request, and it's going to now add the request package into my project. And so you'll see that it actually included 4 dependencies, transitive dependencies, as part of that request. And now if I wanted to go ahead and state push, you'll see that it will get reflected onto your project. So if I were to refresh this, you'll see a request coming as well. And so the other great thing about this is that you can have you can have visibility of your vulnerabilities. You can also have availability of the license information of your dependencies. The auto means is basically this: you're telling the solver, go choose the highest version that will be compatible, based on all of my requirements, right? And so let's see. Now I'm going to show you the history tab again. You'll see that I've added the request package. And one other thing about the project settings is that you can also add a GitHub repo URL here, so that once you've activated your runtime, it'll clone that GitHub repo. So now the more interesting things. So I'm going to also go to, with the interest of time, go to my 3.10.9. So here, for example, you can also, not just using the CLI, but you can also deploy using an installer. So for example, on Windows, I can use offline installer so that you can deploy in an air-gap environment as well. You don't need to necessarily be online. And then, for example, for Linux, you can also do the same thing. Now, if you wanted to now get the SBOM, for example, of that, I'm just gonna, we provide a GraphQL API. So here I'm saying, here's the org and here's the project. And then, so now you can see your SBOM in there. So if I wanted to also show you SciPy, for example, you can see that Python is dependent on SciPy and so forth. So you'll get each component within your project along with their ancestors and the license, the checksum information, who provided it, and the version of that component. And then now I'm going to move on to the attestation. So I've got in my PR branch, we're actually about to go GA with this in the quarter. So we've got some customers who are now playing around with the attestation feature of our platform. Another thing that we're looking into doing is providing additional method of deploying a runtime. In this case, a Docker image. So we've gotten some requests around having a secure Docker image that they can deploy and run on their local environment. So we've provided that as well. So that's upcoming as well. And then if I wanted to do this, so this is another project, very similar dependencies, but let's say I want now to produce the attestation. I'll go ahead and use my GraphQL as well. And so this is my GraphQL for attestation. It's, in here, I want the SALSA provenance, the SALSA VSA, and the CVEs. And so on the right side, you'll see all of the information about each of the components that make up your project. So if I wanted to look for SciPy, for example, here's the SciPy. Let's see, sorry. There you go. And if I wanted to show you the attestation for SciPy, you just, for now, copy and paste. We're trying to, make this a lot more readable and clickable. So here's basically the format of the attestation. I'll go ahead and put this in the editor to make it easier to read. Let me just remove this guy and transform. And you'll see that, this attestation has an envelope with the payload. This is the basically the encrypted version of this payload. So if you wanted to decrypt this, then you can see the rest of this envelope. So within this, you've got the signatures, and within the envelope, you've also got the statement along with the predicate and so forth, and the subject. So I know we only have 2 minutes left, but so I'll stop there in terms of demo in case there are any other questions.
Yeah, we do have some questions. I don't think we're going to be able to have time to get to all of them, and we'll follow up after the webinar with folks.
All right.
You get those. I want to make sure that I pasted in the chat the link to schedule a demo. And I think Cody or Mike may have also pasted in the other links to be able to try the Active State platform and also check out solutions for enterprise security with Active State. And Loreli, that was an awesome demo, extremely well done. I'm enjoying
I
it.
breezed through it.
It was a pleasure to watch the demo in action and see what Active State does, and see, because some of the questions were like, how does it produce the attestation? What does that look like? What form is it in? Those kind of questions. So, and I think some of the follow-ons will be good conversations with folks. So if you want to schedule a demo or even just check out the platform, please be sure and go to platform.activestate.com or activestate.com/get-demo, and you can set up your own conversation with Loreli and Mike and others on the team there. So, Cody, I hate to rush you through. We didn't have time to put your car back together. I'm sorry, my friend. We're going to have to work on that this next weekend. So, but
We'll
I think
give
we
you
have
the
time
attestation at least, Cody.
We'll give you the attestation. There you go.
Sounds
Back
like a
to you.
plan. Awesome. So I do just want to remind everyone that these links that you're seeing on the slides, they are all available in the handouts panel. So while I'm closing us out, feel free to click those so you have those ready to check out once we do close. But to Loreli and Mitch, thank you so much for being here today. To our audience, I would like to remind everyone that this session was recorded. So should you want to rewatch, share with a friend, or anything else you'd like to do with this video, you will be receiving this recording on demand via email shortly after we conclude today. But of course, you can also find it living on the Security Boulevard website at securityboulevard.com/webinars. Our 4 $25 Amazon gift card winners are Janet R., Thomas M., Samina C., and Darlene L. So to our 4 winners, keep an eye on your inbox to claim your gift card. You should receive it in about 48 hours. If you don't happen to see that email, check your spam folder just in case it gets filtered out. I'd like to thank Active State for sponsoring our program. And to everyone who has joined us, thank you so much for being here. We really appreciate your time, but we also really appreciate your feedback. So there will be a survey that pops up as soon as we close out. Feel free to respond to those questions. At the bottom, there is a check mark for a one-on-one demo. So if you would like us to let them know to reach out to you for a demo, go ahead and check that checkbox and we'll forward that along. You can also use that link, but either way, feel free to let us know. To Loreli and Mitch, thank you both once more. And to everyone who's joined us, feel free to disconnect. Have a great rest of your days.
Thank you. Thank you, Cody and Mitch.
Absolutely. Thank you, and Mike, and Cody.